Hello, good morning. This is Debbie Lynn Toomey, Tufts Medical Center's Injury Prevention Coordinator. And this is Aging Strong. Aging Strong is the outreach program that aims to empower older adults with different topics that's really relevant and pertinent that can really enrich their lives. Today's topic is pre-planning and cremation. And today we have Christopher Goulet, who is the funeral director, president of Hamill-Leyden Chapel Cremation Service of Massachusetts. And I want to thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. I'm looking forward to learning about this important topic because as I'm getting older, I'm noticing I'm attending more funerals and wakes, and also working with a lot of older adults. It seems there's still a lot of questions. There's a lot of terminologies people are not too sure about. So I'm really, really honored and glad that you're here with us today to kind of shed some light on some really important questions.
Well, good day, Debbie, and thank you for having us. It's a great honor to be here on your program and to share a little bit of information about the industry and pre-planning. It's funny, we go through cycles in life. You know, when we're all a little bit younger, we have those years of just going to 3 and 4 weddings a year for years, and then those slow down, and eventually, if we're lucky enough, we get to the point where we start to have to attend funerals and wakes. So it's just the cycle of life, I suppose. So again, thank you for having me on your program. We think about when we think about funerals and things when we're going to and attending some of these events, we can't help but let our mind wander to, gee, I wonder what my funeral would be like someday. What would it look like? What would it be? And there are a lot of choices with end of life ceremonies and services. I think more and more nowadays, people are interested in getting their house in order by pre-planning, really to the point that we've started to have to rethink how we spend our time at the funeral home each day. Think about this for a moment. At Hamill-Leyden, literally more people are wanting to meet with us to make pre-arrangements each day than are actually passing away, dying. And as funeral directors, you know, we always saw the subject of making time to make arrangements ahead of time with people as a sort of something we would fit into our schedule when we didn't have wakes or didn't have funerals going on. But literally more and more people want to see us for that reason that we're actually burying each day. And so for that reason, you know, we've really started to look at taking large blocks of time and just having that available for people to come in and talk about it. But let's talk about why, though. Why are people doing this? Well, as a nation, we are planners and preparers by nature, right? We plan for our children's education when we're younger. We plan for our retirement. And increasingly, people are planning for their final demise, their final expenses, perhaps to affect the outcome of what's going to happen when they pass away, or maybe because of a personal experience. They've gone to a funeral and they thought, oh my gosh, I knew this person, and I don't think this is at all what they would have wanted. The idea there is that by making these decisions ahead of time, it is having a little bit of control from beyond the grave, so to speak. So you're affecting the outcome in a way that is in line with your wishes. And it's very safe to do, because we all know that talking about this subject doesn't mean that we're going to be in need of a funeral anytime sooner. Just more of a question as to whether we're going to be prepared or not. So Debbie, let me ask you a question. What does in the consumer's mind, you'll be a representative of the consumer for a moment, if I could, what does pre-arranging mean to you?
Pre-arranging means I kind of think about, you know, I know we're talking about funerals, but I think about weddings, how you kind of
Oh,
arrange weddings, and you do that months and months ahead of time so that you have the day is just the way you want it to be. So that's what I think about, is just, meeting and learning, figuring out the cost, all these colors and, people who's going to be there.
right, right.
So that's what I think about.
So that's a good analogy to the weddings. It is a ceremony marking an important event. But that means something different to really everybody. It used to be that funerals had a cookie cutter approach, right? You'd have the person would pass away on, Monday. On Wednesday, there would be a wake. On Thursday, there would sometimes be a wake, and then a funeral, or the next day, the funeral on Thursday. And that's not the case anymore. We are an aging population, and the consumers that are looking to arrange their services now increasingly are the baby boomer generation. And one thing we know about baby boomers is that they march to the beat of their own drum. So they customize things. They want things in a certain way, or they don't want anything at all. But regardless of where they are coming from, when someone passes away, it turns out that there's just over 150 different decisions that need to be made, and questions that need to be answered. And when left to be decided upon on the occasion of someone's death, we find that those families are coming in to make all of those decisions and provide answers to all of those questions on really what is one of the most difficult, most stressful days of their lives. Oh, and they're grieving, and or in shock, or both. So this is not the time to be making any of those decisions, especially decisions that involve finances and people's final resting places. So I think for all of these reasons, as a society, we've come to the point where people want to talk about this subject. And sometimes they need a little prompting. They'll see an advertisement in the newspaper, or increasingly on social media. Many of our contemporaries are putting information about pre-planning out on social media. And sometimes that will prompt people to pick up the phone and call and talk about a subject that, let's be honest, most of us would prefer not to talk about, which is our eventual death. But putting our heads in the sand, we know, doesn't really help things when a death does occur. So for that reason, people want to talk about it and come in. And the way it typically goes, Debbie, is we'll sit down with a family and we'll talk about themselves. We want to gather some information about them so that we know what's their background, what are their interests, what's important to them. And we want to talk about their families and gather all of that information, which I would like to call at this stage a biography. Right? Calling it gathering information for an obituary is a little heavy at this stage, but we'll talk about their biography and putting a story together, their life, so that eventually down the road someday, we have all the bits and pieces of information about them that we need to know. And we also talk about any specific requests, and we take very detailed notes. Funeral directors, you'll find, are very detail oriented. We'll have detailed notes about families so that we know the subtle ins and outs of what their personalities are like and what's important to them, so that we can craft something that's not a cookie cutter obituary in the future. And then lastly, we'll put together all of the different choices that they'll have and make, things about their memorialization. Do they want to be buried? Do they want to be cremated? Do they want to wake? Do they not? Do they want to have a service in church? Should it be at the funeral home? We'll do all of that and put it all together, and we'll explain to them all of the different costs involved with that. And then for some people, that ends their experience with pre-planning. They have an idea, they feel comfortable, they have resources that will pay for it in the future, and they're not concerned about that element of it. So, but for the vast majority of people, we go to the next step, which is talking about, gee, how do we take care of this and pay for it ahead of time? And for those families, it is very safe to do. Pre-planning and prepaying, which many times go hand in hand, are really something that is safe because at least in Massachusetts, and I think this is now the case in most states in the country, the law requires that the funeral director set aside 100% of the funds that the consumer is prepaying into a state licensed trust or annuity. What this means to the consumer is that the funeral home isn't getting any money ahead of time. We have it all set aside in a secure vehicle so that whenever these services are needed, those funds will be available to pay for the person's funeral arrangements. And most funeral homes will put a price guarantee on those arrangements if the person does prepay. A price guarantee means simply this: the funds that are held on deposit in the trust will grow with a little bit of interest each year, not a tremendous amount, a small amount of interest each year. That interest will offset any cost of doing business that we have going forward, so that if the person passes away in 15 years or 20 years, we have it in writing that we will not go to the family for any additional funds for our services. So it's important distinction. I say most funeral homes will put a price guarantee on their arrangements. And that's a good question you should ask your funeral director when you're making these plans, because the law, at least here in Massachusetts, does not require the funeral home to put a price guarantee on those pre-arrangements.
Can I ask a question, Chris? So
Sure.
when a person prepays, is there a price lock?
That's what the price guarantee is. And that's
Okay.
what I'm referring to when I say a price guarantee.
Okay, that's right.
We're securing or locking in all of our funeral homes costs. What does that mean, our funeral homes costs? When you think about a funeral, it's really broken up into two categories: items of goods and services that the funeral home is providing, and then third party or other expenses that the funeral home is not providing, however, which would normally be expected at the time of the person's death. For example, the cemetery opening charge. So the cost to open the grave at the cemetery. That's a non-funeral home expense. Therefore, most funeral homes will not put a price guarantee on those cemetery charges if the family were to prepay. But it's with the understanding that at the time in the future that the services are needed, if the cemetery charges went up a little bit, then the estate would be responsible for that small amount of increase. Some cemeteries will also allow you to prepay all of their charges directly. And if the consumer is allowed to do that, typically there is a price guarantee on the cemetery charges. So I always like to ask which cemetery the person has in mind, because if it is a burial and there's a cemetery, you'll want to inquire, we would want to inquire for the family if the cemetery allows those costs to be prepaid directly. And if so, we would recommend that the family prepays them directly with the cemetery. Another example of a non-funeral home cost would be things like certified death certificates. Those are obtained by the city or town clerk in the city or town where the person passed away or where they resided. Those are usually nominal costs, usually $15 to $25 per copy. Or another example would be the honorarium to the clergy. So if there was a monk, if there was a priest, a minister to come in to provide a funeral as a celebrant, then it's typical to make an honorarium or a stipend to that monk or rabbi or priest.
Okay.
So when people do this and they set everything up with us, it's all prepaid. Those funds, if they're paying by check, are made out directly to the trust company that we use and sent to the trust, so that at no time are their funds commingled with the funeral homes. We've done that for years and years. However, in the last couple of years, it's actually become a legal requirement that funeral homes do it that way. You're not allowed to commingle people's funds. And the idea there, Debbie, is that our funeral home is experiencing every year, we're serving more and more families than we did the year prior. But not all funeral homes businesses are in a period of expansion. Some are in a period of retraction for whatever reason. And so those businesses who have clients with prearranged funds, those funds are protected if that funeral home were to ever close or merge with another business or move away from the area. The consumer can then redirect the funds that are held in their trust to the funeral home of their choosing. So it's safe, the funds are protected, and it's portable. So if the funeral home moved away or went away and you decided to use a different funeral home, the funds can be directed. Or people think of this sometimes, and if they move, the consumer themselves moves away. Mm-hmm. We're all a nuclear society now, right? We're born in one area, and many times we grow up there and go away to go to college or get married and move away to start a new job. And now we're no longer in the place that we were before. So for those people who have their prearrangements and relocate, your funeral director can assist you in identifying a funeral home in the area that you move to, that your prearrangements could be transferred to.
That's very good to know. Thank you. And as far as there are some people out there who are in the category of needing to spend down in order to qualify for Medicare. So would use of some of their finances, would it be a good idea for them to, allocate some of their finances towards pre-planning? So that way.
For sure. Yeah, what you're referring to is actually Medicaid. So Medicaid is when your assets are diminished to a certain degree where you really don't have any more than $2,500 or so in the bank, and then if you don't own any other assets that could easily be liquidated, then you get on Medicaid, and that's where it pays for your health care and for your nursing home care if needed, or any other long-term care. For those families, and this is something we do quite a bit of too, people are in short-term rehab, but may need long-term rehab. These facilities can be rather expensive, $12,000-$14,000 a month or more for nursing home care. And you want that good care, you need that good care. So you'll pay for that until your assets get diminished. And at some point along that way, someone from the nursing facility, usually a social worker, will recommend that you apply for Medicaid. And there is a big and involved process. I know there are also plenty of wonderful agencies out there that assist families and walk them through the process of applying for Medicaid, because it can be a little bit tricky if you've not done it before. But when that happens, usually one of the first things that they do is they will take a look at all of the assets that the person has, liquid assets. And the first thing that's usually done is they recommend to go prepay for the funeral while there's still some money. And when that happens, we have to make sure that those prearrangements are set up into an irrevocable account. So we mentioned earlier, we set up a trust account for the families that come to us, and other funeral homes sometimes they use an annuity, which is really an insurance policy. But regardless, those either one can be made irrevocable. And what does that mean? Irrevocable simply means that once the funds are prepaid and put into the trust or annuity, they cannot come out until such time as the person passes away and a death certificate is filed with the trust or with the insurance company. So in the eyes of Medicaid and in the eyes of the law, those are exempt assets of the person. And many people think, oh, there's a dollar amount, that the maximum dollar amount that you can put into an irrevocable funeral trust. That is not the case. You know, some people have very elaborate funerals and some people have very simple arrangements. So the law doesn't dictate what you can have. It's your money. You can have what you want.
Very good to know. Yeah. Thank you.
So the main objections that I get from people that are concerned, they want to pre-plan, but they're concerned about going to the final step, which is to secure all of the costs by prepaying, is, gee, what happens if the funeral home closes? Or, you know, what happens if I move away? I think we've addressed both of those issues here, where the arrangements are fully portable. They're not the funeral home's asset, they're your assets. And the funds are protected so that if there were ever any change in the ongoing business of that particular funeral home you're doing business with, then those funds could easily be redirected to another provider.
If a person, for some reason, they pre-planned and they prepaid, and then something happens where they run into real financial hard times, and all they can think of is, gosh, I have that bunch of money I have set aside for my death. Is there a way that I can get that money just to kind of help me with what's going on right now? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And so I've been a funeral director for, I guess now 31 years. And that has come up, I believe, 2 or 3 times in my career. And those funds are the person's asset. And if they're not doing this pre-arrangement in anticipation of a pending Medicaid contract, if they did this of their own will without needing to make it irrevocable, the way we talked about a moment ago for these specific situations with Medicaid, then the person can get their money back. They can cancel it all and get the funds back if the funds are held in trust. If the funds are held in an annuity, it's a little bit different because then insurance laws come about. And when you cash in an insurance policy, you always get usually quite a bit less than what was paid in under insurance contracts. So it's important for them to know, one, is it irrevocable or revocable? If it's revocable, where are the funds held? Is it a trust, or is it a bank trust, or is it an annuity, which is an insurance policy? So if it's with insurance, you do have some options. You can take a loan against that amount if it's revocable, which is sometimes better than cashing it in, because at least you don't lose all that cash value by cashing the policy in. You take a loan against it and then eventually pay it back. Or if it's with a trust, there's a lot more flexibility because they're your monies. They're in a trust. If it's revocable, you can take as much or as little of that as you want out.
And does the person get taxed?
They're only taxed in the trust. They're only taxed on whatever growth. So let's say they put in the funeral, let's say was, to use a round number, let's say it was $10,000. And they put it in, and then 2 years from now, it's, $10,300. They're only going to get taxed on the $300.
Okay.
Whatever that growth was.
Okay. Very good to know.
Yeah. So pre-planning, it's smart, it's safe, and it allows you to have peace of mind, which is really one of the most important benefits of pre-planning, that peace of mind in knowing that you've taken the mantle of all of this decision making and the cost and the stress of it out and off of your loved ones. And I guess I would argue a little bit further that if you've got 3 children, I have 3 children, and I can't get them all to agree on what they're going to have for breakfast every morning, right? So what makes me think that they're going to decide together what to do with dad when his time comes? And it's a little bit of the same thing. I think we all like to think that our family gets along, and there's a lot of similar like-mindedness. But we see, with death on a large scale, let's say we think of 9/11 and other catastrophes like everything going on in Israel right now, we see that death on a large scale tends to bring out the best in people. Around September 11th and shortly thereafter, our nation really, really came together. And I miss those days where we had great feelings of brotherly love for our neighbors and our friends, and we got along and we had a great national pride. But death on a small scale can sometimes bring out the worst in people. And as a funeral director, sometimes we see that where mom has passed away or dad has passed away, and there's just no decision making that can be done without a lot of strife and with a lot of angst and stress on the part of the family and on the part of the funeral director, because we're just trying to help shepherd them through this process. But those are sometimes easier times than others. So I guess I would say pre-planning, not only is it safe for folks to do and they should think about it and talk about it, it's also just makes good sense from a family standpoint. Now, nobody has to be the decision maker or the person taking charge. You're just following the instructions that were set out, usually many, many years before.
Yeah. I wonder, as you talked about large scale, small scale, family dynamics in the small scale level. Are you able to talk about how was during COVID, when we couldn't gather as a group, and there was very limited amount of people who could, attend a funeral? How was that for your industry and the people who had to go through that? We were lucky; we had somebody in our family who passed, but it was like in that magical time when we can gather. And so, we felt blessed, but I can't imagine the unresolved ritual or tradition that could be lingering still in some people, or maybe some anger or frustration or guilt. Can you speak a little bit about that? What was your experience, and what did you notice back then?
Well, Debbie, that's a very very good question, very intuitive question. One thing, funeral directors come from all walks of life, and we're just like any other person. We have different interests and very diverse backgrounds. But if there's one common denominator among funeral directors, is that we care about people and we care about helping people. And for us as a group, if I can speak for all funeral directors at this time, when COVID hit and all the restrictions came up, it was the worst thing in the world for us, because we couldn't help facilitate people's grief. We initially couldn't even have them come in to see their loved one. And for every one of those families, my heart broke when I would hear the stories of how they said goodbye to their mother through a glass window that couldn't open on FaceTime. And people are standing out in the snow or the rain and trying to say goodbye to their loved one. our hearts broke for every one of those families. Having said that, when things started to change and we were able to gather back at that time, it was maximum number of people that could be indoors was 10 at that time. It was a little bit easier because we could then have people come in their own family units. So let's say a person passed away and they have 3 children, the 3 children and their immediate family members would be able to come in, be able to say goodbye to mom, have a prayer, and then they would go out to their cars. And when they were safely in their cars and the doors were shut, the next immediate family group could be brought in and pay their respects. And I think that might be the time that you're referring to, that when you had a loved one pass away. And then at least it wasn't so heartbreaking. It was just a little different. We had to find creative ways to celebrate lives. But that time left an imprint on all of us, whether you're a funeral director or just a lay person, caregiver. I can't imagine the stress that the doctors and nurses all went through and other caregivers during that time, because they were right in the front lines of it as well. Mm-hmm. But it was extremely stressful and difficult, to answer your question. And also we had the added stress of just the exponential increase in the number of people that were dying at that time. So we were overrun with people. In our particular funeral home, we had 3 of our full-time staff that had some comorbidity issues that we were worried about them. So we were paying them to stay home. So the end result was we were doing an awful lot more with awful lot fewer people. And all the while just trying to find ways for people to be able to say goodbye to their loved ones. And that was very, very hard at first. Mm-hmm. A very good question again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just,
I didn't think I was going to get emotional in this interview. I did.
I do this to people, I guess. I don't know.
I know.
But it's just, it's something I think about because it's one of the toughest times that, we have lived in. We've lived through 9/11, the marathon bombing. We have these wars going on in the world and this COVID thing. And it's just, and yet we rise, right? We find ways
to, yep.
Right. And that's one of the blessings. But at the same time, it's just, I like to understand how people we're made to close loops. When you start something, we're meant to finish it, right? So it's just like, to celebrate something. And so how do people close that loop so that way there's no energy being spent with grieving or unresolved anything.
Yeah. And I believe that there are an awful lot of long-term effects as a result of that disease that people are suffering with. I know in, my own family, my sister is a registered nurse, and she was so terrified about getting infected and then bringing it into her work. And she's one of these real empathetic people that would have really been difficult for her if she contributed to somebody else's death because of that. So as a result, she just walled off, and she didn't even see any of our family members other than her husband. It was well over a year before we saw her. And I believe that there's still some lasting effects of that, anxiety and maybe more. So for people who are in that post-traumatic, situation with result of COVID, I really urge you to talk to someone and get help, because we don't have to live with all of this. We got to put the baggage down at some point.
Exactly. That's so true. So true. And that's why, having, knowing what to do when the time gets closer, the pre-planning part, right, is really important. And also knowing what's available, because things are changing. Resources may be depleted, so not knowing is also another way to kind of add to that anxiety and the stress. Yeah. And you mentioned at the beginning, we're a planning type culture.
That's right.
plan. So that way we kind of put a part of our minds at ease. So, what else can we learn about pre-planning and also cremation? And
Yes, yeah.
how has that changed? Has that become more popular, the cremation part?
Yeah, so the cremation rate has been rising steadily for for many years now, since I've been a funeral director, some 31 years now. What sometimes what I'd like to educate people about with cremation is really one of the very oldest forms of disposition. It predates burial even. And cremation is really just an alternative to being buried in the ground. So sometimes, and I like to tell people that because sometimes people think, oh, cremation, there's no services, there's no viewing or visitation. It's just a cremation, but it's never just a cremation. We have the ability to have all of those other ceremonies and rituals and customs can be done with cremation just the way it would be for a burial. So you can still have a wake, and you can still have viewing. You can still have a funeral service with the decedent in church or at the funeral home, and then the cremation can occur. But for people that think of just a simple cremation without any kind of viewing or visitation, there is something called a direct cremation. And direct cremation is no doubt gaining quite a bit of popularity. It's not quite 50% of our dispositions here in Massachusetts, but there are plenty of other states where the cremation rate is well over 50%. Just to our north in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, it's been over 50% for some years now. So we're still a little bit more traditional here in Massachusetts, but it is gaining popularity. And with cremation, there's a wide variety of different prices just with funerals rather. When you go from one funeral home to another, many people, in fact, I've learned most people believe that most funeral homes are pretty similar in price, but that's not the case. So a direct cremation provider can, deliver a direct cremation for maybe $1,600 or $1,700 here in Massachusetts, whereas, a funeral home just up the street from their location might be $5,000 for the exact same thing. So it's important as a consumer to be educated and to start with, who am I comfortable calling? Who am I comfortable making my arrangements in advance with for cremation? Then do a little bit of comparison shopping so that at least you can feel comfortable knowing you've made a good choice. And in Massachusetts, funeral homes are not allowed to own or operate our own crematories. So we're literally doing the cremations at the same local crematories as our competitors are. The only difference is, which funeral home's name is on the death certificate and what the consumer is paying. So it does pay to be a good consumer. And when I say a good consumer, I mean also check out the reviews of that particular business that you're going to be doing with. Make sure that they're pretty solid and they have a good reputation and they're well recommended by the people who have done business with them in the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, is there where does the cremate, when somebody decides I want to be cremated, when does the body get cremated after? I guess what I'm trying to ask is the process.
What's the process?
Yeah. What is the process when somebody is deemed they have passed and the doctor officially said this person is dead and this person goes to the morgue? What occurs after that?
Sure. So the first thing that would, of course, occur is the doctor would, or a nurse, if it were in a nursing home or a hospice setting, someone would pronounce the person. And then from there, the funeral directors would be called to receive into their care the decedent. And once that occurs, we need to get a little bit of information about the person. So hopefully, not to bring it all back to pre-arranging again, hopefully there was a pre-arrangement made so that we would have all of the information on file to be able to begin and initiate that death certificate that we would have the doctor sign. But if not, we would gather all the necessary information, make the arrangements, start the death certificate, then have the doctor sign it. And then what happens is with cremation is, at least here in Massachusetts, anytime someone is cremated, a medical examiner or one of their designates, like a medical examiner, and a medical legal investigator, which are really forensic nurses that are specially trained by the medical examiner themselves, must examine the person and review the death certificate. Why would they do that? Well, the reason is this. Cremation would destroy any evidence of a crime. So if, somebody died in a hospital or in a hospice setting, that's not as much of a concern. However, the medical examiner doesn't make a distinction to where the person died. They just examine every single person that's going to be cremated, so that if there were any signs of a crime that was committed, they would be able to pick up on that and do an autopsy or a further investigation to determine what happened to this person. Wow. And it's just a stopgap measure. There has to be a 48-hour waiting period as well before that cremation can occur. And that stopgap measure gives the medical examiner's office enough time to make that inquiry and examine the person and authorize the cremation to go ahead. So it's a procedural thing. Once that's complete, then we can make an appointment with the crematory to get the cremation accomplished.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm hearing other people, future viewers, who pays for that service? Is that something?
So the family does. So currently in Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Mass gets $200 for a medical examiner approval. So the funeral home has to log in, upload a copy of the death certificate into the medical examiner's secure portal. They review that first, and we let them know what day we're going to the crematory with the deceased person. They will send a medical examiner person there to the crematory when we arrive to do that examination. Okay. So they usually show up a couple of times a day there, and they know who they're going to see. They have a copy of the death certificate that they've printed off or have available on their laptop. And that's when they do the actual exam. So they're just looking for, things like defensive wounds, any punctures, things that look, in their opinion, in their medical opinion, to be questionable. And they have the authority to halt the cremation and even to order an autopsy if they see fit.
Okay. Good to know.
And then, but 99.999 maybe percent of these are just procedural, and they sign an affidavit to allow the cremation to go forward. And that's when the cremation will occur shortly thereafter. And then as soon as the cremated remains are available, then we retrieve them and bring them back into our care and notify the family. So it's simple with a direct cremation. It's a little more involved when there are some services in advance. What I mean by that is, I mentioned or described earlier how the medical examiner will go to the crematory to sign off on the cremation when we let them know we're going and send them a copy of the death certificate. But, we're working with a family right now where the family is going to have services at our funeral home first, and then we're going to the crematory. And the family's going to be there to witness the start of the cremation, Debbie. What that means is I need to get the medical examiner to come in advance to do that approval and not do it at the crematory, so that everything is approved and ready to go forward with the cremation when we arrive in tow with the family. So as it's always a logistics thing with each case. So we have to make sure we're on top of everything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So once for that particular family, once the body has been cremated, is there another ceremony or?
Yeah, many times there is. So we mentioned cremation is just an alternative to having your body buried in the ground. Many times the cremated remains are buried at a cemetery or placed into a niche, a wall niche at a cemetery, sometimes called a columbarium. And so once we make all of the arrangements, we know what we're doing, then we can plan that next step, which is to have the niche or the grave opened and meet the family there for the interment.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people like the idea of keeping the cremated remains at home. I know in my own family, my own grandmother felt more comfortable knowing that my grandfather's urn was on the mantle in the house. She just felt safer knowing that his ashes were there. And then others want to scatter the cremated remains in the ocean. So there's actually services that do that. We've partnered with a gentleman, Captain Brad White, founder of New England Burials at Sea, and we've gone out and done sea scattering services with family members out there in the Atlantic Ocean. We go about a little over 3 miles out, which is a EPA requirement. And we've also done some other types of interments, which many people don't think of, which is a full body burial at sea. So it seems like we do this 2 or 3 times a year, where we'll have a consumer that doesn't want to be cremated, doesn't want to be buried in the ground. They want their body to be buried at sea. So we, again, will go through Captain Brad White, New England Burials at Sea to do that. We just did one out of Hyannis a few weeks ago, where we got on a boat early in the morning. We brought the deceased person with us in a special type of sea burial shroud, which is a special pouch made of organic sailcloth material. And we went about 27 miles out to sea in about 650 or so feet of water. And we did a little ceremony out there with his family, and the gentleman was a marine biologist. And we interred him to the depth. Yeah, it was quite beautiful service. Yeah.
Wow, that's I see that in movies, but didn't realize that was an option. That's great.
It is, yeah. And increasingly more popular. We've been doing it for many years with New England Burials at Sea, and it seems like now it's a few times a year, where before it was maybe once or twice a year. So it seems to be gaining a little bit of popularity.
So is there a wake for somebody who is buried at sea? Is there?
No. The reason is that we don't want to introduce embalming chemicals to a person who is going to ultimately be interred in the ocean. Doesn't make sense to put chemicals into the sea. So we will dress them in only all cotton clothing, and they're placed into that sea burial shroud I described, which is an all organic cloth material made out of organic sailcloth, and specially made, and it's ballast. So it's got one end of it has an attached pouch which holds cannonballs, which are used as a ballast to make sure the person makes it to the bottom. And there's I think 50 or 48 1-inch grommets all the way around the perimeter of that sea burial shroud, where little tiny sea life can get in and does what sea life does.
Wow, that's very fascinating. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. not for everybody, but for those people who have a special affinity to the ocean or don't want to be buried or cremated, sometimes a good alternative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Definitely.
cremation, in a nutshell, is gaining in popularity. Many times, people cite their reason for selecting cremation is the conservation of our natural resources. Quite simply put, they don't see the need to occupy a 7 foot by 3 foot tract of land in perpetuity at a cemetery. So they want to conserve our natural resources and our land, and they see cremation as a good alternative to doing that.
Mm. And is that environmentally friendly? During the cremation
Well, they
process?
say there's some studies that show that there are some harmful chemicals that are introduced in the atmosphere as a result of the cremation. But I think it's negligible. I'm not an expert about these things, but I can tell you that the things that I've read, uh, it seems to be a negligible amount as compared to, you know, embalming someone and putting those types of chemicals into the ground. Um, Seems to be maybe the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, what else can we learn? We have a few more minutes left. What else do you want us
Wow.
to learn
10:52. Yeah.
about?
So I'd like to talk about a bit about, if we can go back to um, the difficulties, I think, as a society that we're still struggling with. Understand that we all made it through. Everybody that's here right now, all of your listeners and viewers, we all made it through COVID. We've probably all lost people that we were close to or that we loved. But let's give each other a little bit of pause and a little bit of break for the struggles that we're going through in life. Life is not easy for some people, and it's even harder for others. So let's all try to give each other a little bit of latitude and the love and dignity that we all deserve. Let's try to care for one another and notice when people need help, suggest that help, and understand that this world was changed a bit during that. I saw it in my own family. I mentioned my little sister earlier, and I think a lot of people are still struggling with that. Let's try to be supportive and understanding and caring, and let's all try to get help if we need it.
Mm,
I know it's not funeral related, but I mentioned earlier, if there's a common denominator amongst funeral directors, we're all caring people. That's
yeah,
my message right now.
yeah, yeah.
That, and decide who as a funeral home you would want to do business with in the future, and make some time to talk about that subject, pre-planning, and make an appointment with your funeral director to do just that. It's very smart to do, and it just means you're going to be a little more prepared than the next guy whenever that need arises for these services.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think you really emphasize the point that consumers need to really do their homework, right? And that means interviewing, going
Sure.
to the funeral parlor, noticing the environment. Does it seem warm, and does it seem like it's inviting and welcoming, or do they seem like they know what they're talking about? So it's really, it's us really being an advocate for ourselves during, the end of our life. So it's really important.
Yeah. And know that being a good consumer, just like we wouldn't just go by the first house we ever saw. We'd look around, we'd maybe talk to a couple different realtors and look at a few places. This is an important thing here. We're a nuclear society. What that means to the funeral industry is no longer can We always count on multi-generations of one family always doing business with funeral parlor A or funeral parlor B. We all move around. So those legacies are much less relied upon nowadays by funeral directors. We have to meet our consumer. We have to treat people the way we would want to be treated. We have to put our information out there and treat people fairly and develop a great amount of goodwill in our community. And that generally results in people leaving reviews about their experience with us. So read those reviews, see what people are saying. A lot of funeral directors put their testimonials on their website too. So some of those same reviews are viewable on their websites. So see what people are saying.
Actually, that's a very good point, because when you read people's reviews, you get to see through their lens what meant a lot to them. And maybe that's something that a person who could be reading the reviews may not even think of. So, you're learning by reading the reviews as well.
Yeah. I rely on it a bit when I'm doing something that's outside of my wheelhouse. I have, I just had a company come and I needed a talented painter to come and scrape a bunch of area on the funeral home and re-prep it and prime it and paint it. And I finally said, there's some good companies that I know in the area, but I'm going to go online. I'm going to see what the consumers that did business with them are saying. And the one that I thought that I was going to go with, I didn't. So I'm glad I took a little bit of time to see what people are saying, and the company that did come in, not only did they do a great job painting the funeral home and doing all the work that they did there, but they cleaned up after themselves every day. You never even knew they were there. So that was important to us, because we don't want to have a big mess outside there. Yeah. So that's why I went with the company I did. And it's the same with funeral homes.
Yeah.
Go with your gut. Talk to the people that, you want to do business with, but then see what else is out there and check out their reviews. Well said. I think in that particular example, you pretty much kind of wrapped up our talk today. Basically, make sure you're of sound mind and you have time to do your research and to pre-plan and to, go with your gut and not leave everything to the last minute, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, Chris, I want to thank you so much for being here. I'm sure, a lot of the viewers got so much from your information and your thank you.
So
it was a privilege.
Oh, privilege is here too. So how can people learn more about you and also Hamel Leiden? So in case they have questions.
So people can visit us on our website if they like. There's a lot of helpful information on there, including helpful things that need to be attended to when someone passes away. A lot of people have asked us, gee, is there a list? What should I be doing first? So there's a checklist there, and there's a lot of other helpful resources on there and other information. You can visit our website at hamelleiden.com. That's HAMELLYDON.com. Or you can visit our Facebook page, Hamel Leiden Chapel, or you can give us a call. Our phone number is 617-472-5888. Again, 617-472-5888.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
And so this is Debbie Lynn Toomey, Tufts Medical Center's Injury Prevention Coordinator. I want to thank all of you for watching this program. Until next time, be safe. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Debbie. Take good care. Bye-bye.